Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe. Hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon. If you are tuning in live here on Behance, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. We've got Rob and Wade, Laura, Faisal, and Gareth, Umacorn, and Jack. Who else do we have in here? Stroofy. Great to see all of you. Hope you're all excited for another masterclass. Hope you're all excited for the weekend. Hey, Katarina and Renee. And I see Rob has a question already about, can XD be used to design web ads? Absolutely. A lot of marketing designers are working on web ads. I think I've done a video tutorial on how to do that, but I definitely am going to be doing more going into the future. So stick around for that. Maybe I'll do one or a few during a masterclass as well. And hopefully, because this year I will be releasing a lot more UI kits and sample files, maybe I'll be able to release some of those so that you can all use them as templates. All right, Brett from Hamilton, Ontario. Great to see you. And Sayantan, if I mispronounced your name, I do apologize. Hey, Chris, great to see you as well. Alrighty. Hopping over to my screen. So, we're gonna get going with masterclass number 86. And if you follow me on Dribbble or Twitter or all the different places, you may have seen this design. I think I showed some of it last week during the masterclass as well. I recently uploaded this to Dribbble and also created a video on YouTube on how to create an interactive scrollable map using scroll groups, components, Lottie files, the whole 9 yards. So definitely go over there, watch that video. It's relatively short after this live stream. But today, we're going to be designing this experience because after I uploaded that video, many of you asked, it's great that we can create the scrollable map, but what about the rest of it? How do we create all of it? So let's do that. Well, I don't know if we're gonna get to all of it today, but we're gonna get to as much as possible. Nabil is asking, how are you? I'm okay. I did catch a cold this week and I severely bit my tongue this morning eating a vitamin, but all things considered, I'm okay. I know there's a lot going on in the world right now, so hopefully all of you are okay. Hopefully your family is okay. I do send my thoughts to everyone who's over in the Ukraine, who's dealing with everything going on. Hopefully something positive can come of that, but hopefully you're all okay. All right, so in Adobe XD, and we're going to start now. This experience in particular can be designed for a variety of devices, web, tablet, potentially iPhone as well. But let's go ahead and maybe we'll go for, what device do we want to go for this week? Maybe an iPad, possibly? Let's try an iPad. And then this one in particular is likely, since it's a navigation experience, going to be viewed in landscape mode. So with the artboard selected, I'm actually going to just name this navigation. And over within the properties inspector, I'm going to flip it, landscape. All right, so we've got our artboard set up and ready to go. Now, the first thing we might want to add in there is the map itself. And we're gonna get into the whole scroll groups and panning and all that stuff eventually. We'll probably not tackle that first because I do want to get the UI kind of built in. But with the rectangle tool, shortcut key R, I'm going to simply draw one out across this artboard, just like that, just to create a shape. And I'm doing this so that I can use this as a mask for the map that I'm going to throw in there. And I'm going to show you why, especially if you're new to Adobe XD, I'm going to show you why we're going to do that. So if I go over to either Finder or Explorer, images, we can just grab an image like this and pop it in. Now, obviously this is not a map. I'm going to get to the map in a second, but what you're noticing is that when I place an image on top of a shape, and this could be a rectangle, an ellipse, polygon, a custom shape using the pen tool, it could be anything. It masked it really nicely in place. If that shape was not there and I dragged an image directly in, That's a very large image, right? So using a shape will certainly help you constrain the image that you're dragging in, which definitely helps from time to time. Now, I'm going to hop over to my Creative Cloud libraries. Right over here, I do have some maps that I have saved in here. And these are from various places. Some of them are from Adobe Stock. Some of them are from Snazzy Maps, which is a service that lets you generate and customize Google Maps, which is kind of cool. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab one of these and boop, pop it into place. So it works very similar to Finder or Explorer. You can just grab an image and drag it in. You can also have videos inside of your Creative Cloud libraries as well. So Mayor is asking, is my request for tablet first product being completed here? It might be. I remember your request from, I think it was last week or the week before, for more tablet design. And what's interesting about tablet design is much of it is very similar to web design with a few little tweaks for touch capabilities. But this could kind of pass for web, desktop, or tablet design, but this is definitely tablet. All right, so we have our map in place, and like I mentioned earlier, we're going to get to the scroll groups at some point in the future. But over top of this map on the left-hand side, we may want our navigation panel. And this is where all of our directions and our destination is going to live. So with the rectangle tool, one more time, I saw a funny tweet on Twitter. Obviously, a tweet was on Twitter, but I think it was earlier this week. Someone posted that like 95% of design can be created with a rectangle. And I think I've said something similar in the past. I just thought that was funny. All right, so I'm going to position this about 16 pixels from the left-hand side. And as I was moving it, you can see that it's dynamically showing me how far it is. Or you can hold down your Alt or Option key and hover, and it's going to show you the distance as well. And I'm going to do the same thing at the top here. And at the bottom, you can also, if you want to resize very precisely, if you hold down your Command key on the Mac, Control key on Windows, you can use your arrow keys and resize it up by 1 pixel. Or if you hold down Shift, you can also resize by 10 as well. All right. I know I do see Jason has a bunch of different questions about UI and UX. What made you consider this profession? Those are pretty big questions that I can definitely, start to answer. I'm going to go ahead and round out these corners a little bit. My career path kind of went in various directions. I started as a 3D designer. I went to school for 3D design in college, and I was pretty set on that. But personal life happened and things kind of shifted, and I was also using Photoshop a lot at the time, so I kind of went in different directions, and then eventually I kind of led into the UI and UX world. I just love solving problems and creating experience. Maybe one day I'll get more into it, but yeah, my career kind of shifted all over the place, but I'm pretty happy where I am right now. All right, now this container in the background, what we'll want to do is we want to create a little bit of a darker experience. This overall experience is more on the darker side, so maybe a nighttime experience for a tablet in a car or something like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by setting the color of this particular container. Now, we're definitely going to have to experiment a little bit, especially if we have a darker map in the background. So we might want to do something like maybe a linear gradient, maybe a little bit lighter at the top, and then towards the bottom we can get a little bit darker. Now, what you're noticing is that it's definitely blending in with the background quite a bit. Now, a linear gradient may not be necessary. We can always drop back to something like a solid color and do something like this. It might make it a little bit easier to work with. But again, it's blending in with that background quite a bit. So we're going to do a few things to help separate it. One, we're going to start with a little bit of a border. And what I typically like to do when I'm working on a darker experience with a border is set the border color at a pure white, which is obviously a little bit too strong right now, but then take the opacity and then bring it down. Somewhere around 10% looks not too bad. Not great yet, but not bad. And what this will allow is if this container, or if we decide to add additional elements on top of it or a background blur, which we might get to, if it contains different colors, then it'll allow those colors to kind of come through that border by dropping the opacity versus keeping the opacity to 100% and then setting it to a color like this, right? Right now it looks very similar, but again, if you have different colors kind of bleeding on through, then it'll allow those colors to come through. All right. Now the next thing we might want to add is possibly a little bit of an inner shadow, and this will it's more of a stylistic thing. It allows us to add a touch of highlight at the top. You know, if you remember the overall experience that I showed here, it's very neon, it's very cyberpunk-ish. So we might want to add a little bit of maybe a purple highlight at the top. Again, stylistic, probably not necessary, but fun, right? So we'll do something like that, and then we'll set the Y value around 1 or 2, the blur value down to 0, and we'll definitely have to experiment with the opacity a little bit. Something like that. Keeping it nice and subtle. We'll stick with that and we'll see how that looks once it all comes together. And then finally on this container, another stylistic choice, very optional, is a background blur. So I'm going to turn on background blur right down here at the bottom right-hand corner of the properties inspector. Boop. And then what we'll want to do is make sure that it's very blurred in the background, especially considering we're going to be having a lot of elements on top of this container. I speak about background blurs a lot. If you have something like this, right, and then maybe we'll set it, I don't know, somewhere around here. There's a lot going on in this area down at the bottom here. So if you do have text and if you do have images that need to be seen, it's going to be a little bit difficult. Some of it kind of might blend in. So in these cases, I just like grabbing the blur and then just dragging all the way up to 50, so it's a nice, nice blurry blur, if that makes any sense. And then, with the brightness, I'm going to also drop it a little bit, just so it's nice and dark. And then, I did go ahead and set up the color earlier. I chose this darker blue with a little bit of gray in it, and I kind of like that color. I want to bring some of that color back in while also keeping it fairly dark and blurry. And that's where this option down here at the bottom comes into play. This is the effect opacity. As you increase this value, it's going to slowly bring back some of your fill, whether that be a solid color, a gradient, or even an image, right? So I'm going to bring this back up, and you're noticing it's bringing in some of that color, and it's also keeping that blur. So it gives you a really nice balance of your original fill color and then also a background blur. You don't want to go too crazy with these background blurs because then it could introduce all sorts of problems. So we're going to keep it nice and subtle. All right, so we have our container looking pretty good, and for the most part, it solved a little bit of the problem of the container blending in with the background. Still not perfect, but we'll get to that a little bit. Now, at the top of this container, what I would like to do is add a few elements. One, I would like to add maybe a preview of the destination. So there might be an image kind of blending in with the background instead of sort of like, typically when you have a navigation app, Google Maps or whatever it might be, MapQuest, is that still around? I don't know. You might have a very sharp contained image. I think it'd be interesting to have it kind of just right here at the top blending in a little bit. So to make my life a little bit easier, I'm going to duplicate this existing shape, Command and Control D. I'm going to drag this up a little bit, and maybe we'll place it somewhere right about here, right? Now, we don't need all these styles. So we don't need the border, we don't need the inner shadow, we definitely don't need the background blur. But what we do want is we want an image right in this container. So I'm going to hop over to Finder, and I've got this great image here that I licensed from Adobe Stock. I'm going to drag this in, boop, pop it into place. And if I need to, I can always double click and adjust the sizing and the scaling inside of this object mask. There we go. Now, obviously, we have a few problems, right? We're going to have information on top of this. We're going to have, maybe battery percentage, weather, time, the destination, how fast you're driving. Putting information on top of this particular image is going to be a little bit difficult. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to blend it in a little bit. And also we're going to want to make a few stylistic changes, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to unround out these corners at the bottom. So I'm going to hold down Alt or Option and drag that in and drag this in as well. Now, another thing we might want to do is use a blend mode to help blend it with that background container a little bit. So if we hop over here to the blend modes, we have a ton that we can potentially use. Soft light, not too bad. Screen, not too bad as well. Lighten could definitely work, which I think we're going to probably go with this one. If I turn it off and then on, still looks a little bit strange, but we're getting there, right? And then the next thing I might want to do to help blend it in with the container and maybe have it fade a little bit is add a gradient on top. So what I can do is I can duplicate this shape one more time, Command Control D, and name this Overlay. And then I'm going to set the blend mode back to normal. And then for the color, I'm going to switch it over to a linear gradient. And then what we'll want to do is we'll want to set this basically the same color at the top and the bottom. So we'll do something like, maybe we'll do some sort of dark purple. We'll start there and then we will see what happens. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. But the top color, because we want some of this image to be seen, I'm going to drag this down to 0, right? And what we can also do is maybe sample this color down here at the bottom so that we have this really nice blend. There we go. Again, we kind of want this image to blend in with the background and not be too in our face, because we're going to have information on top of it that we want users to be able to read. Now, we're probably going to have to go back and make some changes to this as we start adding that information. But for now, we're going to run with this. All right. So with that in place, let me just make a few very quick changes to this image here, or this overlay. Just knowing that information will be like right in this area here, I'm just going to darken this a touch more. There we go. All right. Again, we'll probably have to go back and make some changes. And I'm losing a little bit of the border, so I'm just going to bring this in a touch. I might want to actually bring both of these in a touch. Something like that. And then maybe down as well. Actually, up. That's pretty good. All right. So now, on top of this, like I mentioned, we're going to have some information, our destination, where this is located, the address, how far it is, that sort of thing. So what I want to do is we're going to start with the destination, or what the name of that place is. In this case, we're going to grab the text tool and we'll do something like component center. Get a little bit punny in here. And in terms of the styling for this text layer, obviously we don't want this. Can't see it at all. So we're going to first change the color to a pure white. And then for the actual typeface, there are a few different directions we can take this, but I think something like, the name of the destination could be a little bit more stylistic than the other information, like the address, because this is going to be naturally a little bit larger. So we can do something like maybe capital, and then I might want to bump it to maybe bold. So we'll do something like this, which is an interesting, especially, it definitely kind of works for the style that we're going for, this cyberpunk neon, I don't know what you would call it, but it definitely kind of works for something like this. And we can also adjust the spacing as well, bring it in a touch. There we go. And then down below, right about here, we're going to want the address. And this is kind of where we're definitely going to have to pay attention to our typefaces. So if I were to do something like, maybe this is the category. So maybe this is a design studio, right? And this is going to be naturally quite a bit smaller. So as these stylistic typefaces get smaller and smaller, they become harder and harder to read. So we'll definitely want to switch it up a little bit. And in this case, we'll do something like maybe interstate, and we can keep it at bold and see what that looks like. And I definitely don't want it so squishy, so I'll bring that out. That could work. And then down below this, we're going to want maybe the address of this location. So maybe this will be like 201 boop drive, because of course, and then we'll put some random Zorgan or something. Some interesting cyberpunky name. And I do frequently take looks at my previews, which is this icon at the top, this play icon, or Command or Control and then enter on your keyboard. That'll launch it. And I do this quite often just so that I can get a better perspective of how things are looking. Because up close, it might look okay, right? But when you zoom out, it may not look that great. All right. And then finally, down below, we may want to put a little bit of information about how far this location is from maybe your current location and how long it might take you to drive there. So in this case, it might be maybe 2.4 miles. And then we'll have another text layer for maybe 8 minutes. Now, this particular area here, this might be a good opportunity to explore stacks a little bit. What we would like is maybe to add maybe an icon right about here, maybe a separator in the middle, and then the ability to switch these around if necessary. So I'm going to select both of these text layers, place them into a group, Command and Control G, and I'll call this distance maybe. And then over within the Properties Inspector, I'm going to turn a stack on, which is going to automatically define it as a horizontal stack in this case, considering the layers are laid out horizontally left to right. And what this will allow me to do is I can dive in here and just very easily swap the position of these layers, but I can also add additional layers in there. So if I want to maybe create a location icon, let's grab our ellipse tool. I'll draw one out, and you're noticing as I did that, it automatically pushed those layers to the side. And if I wanted to, again, swap the position, I can very easily do that. So I can dive in here, I can double click, and we can maybe create our own little icon. Just bring this down a touch, bring this in a little bit, and if we wanted to, we can always do something like, maybe not. Sometimes you have ideas in your head and then you try them and you're not so good. Now, what I was going to do next is I was going to grab the ellipse tool one more time and draw a circle on top of this so I can use that to cut it out and create a Boolean object. But watch what happens when I do that. It pops it over there. And it's actually doing exactly what it should be doing. It's adding another object to the left-hand side inside of this stack. And it's because we have a stack on, right? So it's doing, again, what it should be doing. Now in this case, we don't want that. We don't want the new object to go beside it in the stack. And of course, if I were to drag it on this side, it would place on this side. Again, doing what it should be doing. I want it to go with the object. So in this case, I want to place this particular layer inside of a group. Command and Control G, and I'll call this pin. And then if I go into the group and then create an ellipse, there we go. So if you want to avoid the stack doing stack things, right, then just place your objects into a group and then that will help you with that. So now if I have this selected, I'm going to also select the pin in the background. Angelina's saying, I've learned so much from his videos. Thank you. You're welcome, Angelina. I'm glad I have been able to help. All right, so I have these two objects selected, and up at the top right-hand corner, I want to create a Boolean object, in this case, subtract. Boop. Now, it's a little bit too large, right? The nice thing, actually, it's not too bad. That could work. I mean, the overall pin is quite big, so I can just, resize this down, and you're noticing that the objects to the right are also resizing as well, which is exactly what we want. What I was going to say is these Boolean objects are completely non-destructive. So if this hole was too big, I can very easily double click inside of it and then make some changes if I need to. I can make it smaller, make it bigger. I can fine tune it over here to the right in the Properties Inspector. Let's go for 3 and 3, just so it's nice and round. And that could do. All right, let's bring this in just a touch. Is that too much? Yeah, it's not too bad. That'll do. And then finally, I might want a little bit of a separator over here to the right. And this is where I will let the stack do its thing. Might be a little bit too, it's a little bit too big. Bring that down. Maybe we'll add about 6 pixels in between each. Not bad. And then maybe to give it a little bit of style, we may want to explore maybe a border on, we don't need these separators to really stand out. So maybe I'll turn off the fill. I'll add a bit of a border. We have a little bit of a pink color scheme going on in the background. So I'll do something like that. And then maybe I will increase the gap a little bit and then experiment with the dashes. Something like that could look interesting, right? There you go. Renee is asking, what's Boolean exactly mean in this context? So if you're familiar with, I lost my words. If you're familiar with Illustrator, very similar to Pathfinder tools. So, Boolean objects, rectangle and rectangle, right? So if I select these two, right up here at the top, we have our add Boolean object. So it would take these two shapes and combine them into one, as you can see right there. Subtract would subtract, so whatever's on top, it would essentially cut a hole into the shape behind it. And then you have a little bit more complex intersect, which would kind of cut a hole, or it would create a shape based on what piece of the objects are intersecting. So in this case, it's this little rectangle right here, just like that. And then we have our exclude overlap, which is kind of the opposite of intersect. So it's going to keep both of the shapes, but exclude the area that is overlapping, just like that, right? So hopefully that helps a little bit. All right, so we have our information for our component center, and I'm going to select all of this, place it into a group, and I'll call this location. And I can also enable a stack on this entire group as well, even though I have a stack inside of this group. So I'm going to turn a stack on. In this case, it defined it as a vertical stack because the objects are going top to bottom. So if I needed to, I can always swap the position of these items very easily, and I can even dive into this stack and swap the positions as well. All right. So with that in place, over to the right, we may want a little bit more information. Again, this experience is primarily meant to be displayed in a car. So it might display how fast you're going at any given time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop over here to the right. We'll do something like 88. If anyone gets that reference, definitely throw it in the chat. And I know I'm going to get yelled at for doing this, but I'm going to add another typeface. I probably should not do that, but I know a lot of people ask me from time to time, how many typefaces should I use? How many different fonts and styles? And the honest answer is, 2, maybe 3, maybe. Don't go much more than that. I've already used 3. I've got Capital, Interstate, and Futura. It's probably pushing it a little bit. I would probably stick to 2 with an experience like this, but we're having some fun. We're experimenting a little bit. There we go. And then Martin says Back to the Future. Very good. And then we'll just do at the bottom miles per hour. Make that nice and small. Place in the center. We may want to drop the weight a little bit of this. Something like that. Ooh, it's a little bit too small. Boop, boop. That could do. I think all of this is a bit too small. All right. We can definitely spend a little bit more time on sizing at some point in the future, but in the future, never mind. All right. Jason says, my professor said no more than 2 fonts. Shout out to Mr. Moody. Mr. Moody is pretty much correct. I would agree. Typically, you don't want to go more than 2 unless you really need to for some reason, maybe accessibility or something. But Yeah, stick with 2 or under. But it's a great name, by the way. Moody, as Philip says, Mad-Eye Moody. All right, so we've got this information in place. And I'm going to group this. Just keep things nice and organized. Maybe move it up a little bit. And then at the top here, what we might want is a little bit of information, maybe device information. This might be an electric car, so there might be a battery indicator, and then possibly maybe weather, degrees, and then maybe the time over to the right. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with our battery indicator over here. Now we could make our own icon, which could be kind of fun. So with the rectangle tool, let's draw one out. That's a little bit too large, probably. Mohammed is saying two fonts are one too many. Choose fonts with a good family. I mean, it depends. It really depends on what your experience is. If you're designing, a website, or let's say a landing page, right? I kind of like the idea of having, and I do this a lot on my masterclasses, I like the idea of having a nice, really stylistic header to really catch people's attention. And you don't want to use that same typeface for the rest of the body copy because it'll just be way too difficult to read. So in that case, I would say, use 2 different typefaces. One very stylistic, a display typeface to catch people's attentions, and then, one something like Avenir Next or something for the body so it's nice and legible. I wouldn't say that you have to have just one typeface. I would say 2 typically works. But yeah, don't go much more than 2 or 3. All right, so we have our battery, and I'm going to maybe let's maybe put on the outside so we have a little bit of a curve on the inside as well. I don't know if that's too big or not. We'll see. And then over here, I might want a little bit of a, what's that thing called on a battery, that the connector or the, I don't know, it's a something. It's probably not the right word. Cornell is asking, how do you decide which fonts and colors to use in your, oh, Cornell, that is a very big question. A lot of times it comes down to trial and error. Going through your font list and trying a bunch of different fonts until they kind of stick. Adobe Fonts is a great resource. They have this feature where you can see what typefaces go with each other, which is kind of nice. And the same thing with color too. It depends on what you're designing as well. If you're designing a medical application, don't use red, because a lot of people who are using that medical application might be in a state of panic or potentially suicidal, and red is going to make them angrier because that's kind of what red does. So, in some cases, don't use red, but some cases you might have to use red for like error states and things like that. So yeah, a lot of it's trial and error. All right. Yeah, that battery's a little bit too large. Let's drop this down a little bit, bring that in. This might be too big too. Yeah, it'll do. All right, and then on the inside, what we might want is, the actual charge status. And this we can use maybe like a nice greenish blue color. Something like that. Obviously, we're gonna round out these corners just a little bit. Now we could do something like this, which doesn't look too bad, or we can get a little bit stylistic with it. May not be necessary, but we can kind of break it up a touch so we can kind of show kind of the progress of the charge, right? So maybe we'll do 1 and then 2 and then 3. Is that, I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe just like this. That's fine. And then I might just want to bring this, oops, that's the wrong button. This one. Yeah. Maybe. I think it was too thick. Welcome to designing, folks. Trial and error. Some things will work, some things will not work. You'll go back and forth a million times, and then you'll still hate it. All right. Someone's asking, my keyboard is not working in XD. That doesn't sound very good. I would definitely recommend tweeting at Adobe Care on Twitter to see what's going on. I do know that in the past there have been issues with Windows in particular, where there was a Windows bug that was causing the keyboard to stop working, or at least keyboard shortcuts to stop working in XD. I don't know if that's the case for you. Definitely make sure XD is updated, make sure Windows is updated. I thought that was fixed, but yeah, tweet at Adobe Care and see if they can take a quick look. All right, and then over to the right, we'll do something like 95%. And I should probably mention, if you are like me and you get lazy from time to time, or all the time, and you don't want to create icons yourself, definitely grab an icon. So hop over to your plugins panel at the bottom left-hand corner, and then there's a great plugin called Icons for Design. And here you can type out something like battery, and look at all these battery icons that are a million times better than the one that I tried to design in the last 10 minutes. So you can just grab one of these icons. Let's say this one from Iconic. Maybe the battery is charging, right? You can rotate it. It's all vector based, so you can change the color. And you've got an icon, right? There you go. But anyways, all right. So I'm going to go ahead and select this information, group it. This will be called battery. And then over to the right, we're going to also want our weather and possibly our time. Now, just to make sure that everything lines up and it's kind of the same size, I'm going to just design it beside this element for now. We'll do something like 72 degrees. And if anyone's on the Mac, hold down Alt-Option-Shift and then press the number 8 on your keyboard to get the degrees symbol. And then we're going to want maybe a weather icon. So back in our icons, I'm not going to design this one because clearly my icon design skills are not that great. Maybe it's snowing. Why not, right? I guess it wouldn't be 72 degrees if it was snowing. We'll fix that. What would it be if it's snowing? So now is this Celsius or is this Fahrenheit? We'll say it's Fahrenheit. Let's say 2. 2 is a good number. And I'm going to place this into a group, weather, and then maybe we'll turn a stack on. We'll add one more text layer, Command and Control D. Whoops, I don't want both of those. And then the time will be 12:37 p.m. Beautiful. All right. Snap it into place. Jason says, "Yikes!" Probably about the weather. Very cold. Very, very cold. Alrighty. We're getting there. We are getting there. All right. So now that we have our battery indicator, we have our weather. The sizing looks a little bit off as I'm looking at this now. Yeah, it's not too bad. But I would definitely go back and make some tweaks to it so that the sizing kind of looks like it's balanced a little bit. But what I do want to get to is down here, we might want a preview of your directions. So in this case, maybe the user searched for a location, in this case, the component center. They tapped on it to go, and then, there might be a preview of the directions. And then at the bottom, there will be maybe a button to actually start. Rob says, where in the preferences do you turn on the sound effects in XD? That would be wonderful. I would definitely volunteer to create sound effects for XD. That'd be wonderful. All right, so what I'm gonna do is draw out, maybe 8 from the side could potentially work. And I'm gonna round out the corners quite a bit. Well, not too much, maybe about 8 as well. Now there might be 2 different styles to these directions. Maybe the current direction that you're currently on, and then maybe the upcoming directions. And of course, there'll be a button at the bottom. Mohammed is saying importing complex PSDs and XD containing multiple artboards, lots of tables is troublesome. Yeah, I mean, we're always going to run into things like that because the two applications are drastically different. Photoshop has some features that XD has. XD has some features that Photoshop has some features that XD doesn't have. XD has some features that Photoshop doesn't have. So whenever you're importing Photoshop files into XD, there's always the chance that they get jumbled up a little bit. I know the team has worked pretty hard to make sure that doesn't happen as often, but it's always going to happen from time to time. And hopefully one day it's all kind of unified, but sometimes it'll happen. All right, let's go ahead and this will be the current direction. So we'll do something like this, and maybe we will do a bit of a darker background. Again, we want that neon style effect. Maybe we'll do a drop shadow, but not the typical drop shadow. We want sort of like a nice glow, right? Nice glow in the background, something like that. We can also do an inner shadow, possibly. Same sort of deal, right? 0, and then bump that up a touch. Look at that nice little glow. And then on top of this, and this is where we might have to go back and make some changes because we want to make sure that everything is nice and legible. But on top of this, we're going to want the actual information for this direction. So we'll do something like 429 meters. We'll bump this up to about bold. Maybe make this nice and large so we can see it while we're driving. And then this will be the actual direction. So continue straight onto asset lane. Make this nice and small. Now we may want to keep maybe asset lane, which is the actual street or area that you're going to be going straight on. Might want to keep that bold, but we might want to drop this a little bit. Maybe to medium. Is that too? That could work. Let's make this a little bit larger. And we'll make this a bit larger as well. Oops. Maybe a little bit larger. Boop. And then, often in these navigation apps, there is some sort of an icon to let you know very quickly whether you're going straight, right, left, that sort of thing. So back in my icons, I'll just look for a nice little arrow going up. Something like that looks pretty good. Change that to white. Make it a little bit larger. And there we go. We have our first direction. All right, that could do. So I'm going to make sure to select all this information, group it, and this will be called direction, maybe active. And this is an area where we can possibly explore components as well. So what we're able to do is we can, have this selected, and then we can create a component either within the properties inspector over to the right over here. We can go to our document assets back over here and create a component here, or we can use the Command or Control K shortcut. And this will be our main component. So if we're going to be adding additional states or we want to make changes to all of our components at once, this is where we would make those changes. So I'm going to make one more new state, or one state, because I don't have it. Oh, I have a default state, I suppose. And this is going to be upcoming. So this is going to be the directions that are coming up next, right? And in this case, we don't want them to be as neon, as bold as the other ones. So we'll do something like, we're definitely going to want to remove the inner shadow and the glow. We probably don't need a border, and we'll do something very simple for the color. Something like this, right? There we go. And as an example, we might want to do something like 1.2 miles, turn right onto Artboard Alley. There we go. And then we're gonna also want to maybe do a different arrow. Do we have any curved arrows here? Oh, we have this one here. I suppose that could work. Or we can just do a simple right arrow. Or you can also use an icon manager. So if you have icons on your computer that you've either licensed or purchased or downloaded, you can use something like Nucleo, which I use quite often, which has been taking a little bit longer to load lately, probably because I have so many icons in here. But I do have in here somewhere some arrows that turn, that kind of curve to the right. Too many arrows. All right, let's just go back to our, where was this one from? Iconic. All right, we'll just, you know what I could do? Whoop. That'll work. Just rotate it to the right. So we have our default state, which is our active, and then we have our upcoming, which is our upcoming, right? Makes sense. So now if I duplicate this downward just by dragging, holding down Alt or Option, maybe I'll put it about 8 pixels, I can very easily switch over to our upcoming state. And then I might want to actually just drop the opacity, possibly, of the overall, just so it kind of blends in a little bit. And then possibly what we might want to do is add a little bit of a shadow, but we'll see what that looks like. And I'm also going to make my life a little bit easier by grouping these two. I'm going to turn a stack on, and then boop, right? And let's go through and make some changes to these directions. Turn right, sure, we'll turn right again. And then we'll do something like Lottie Lane. Oops, Lottie Land? I don't know, that could be fun. Like Candyland. And then one more. And we'll flip that, considering it might be on the left. And then maybe I'll just drop the opacity a little bit more of the upcoming directions. Maybe. Definitely, test with your users, see if they can read all of these directions. Possibly they may not be able to, but definitely, definitely you might want to do that. And I might want to just add a bit of a drop shadow, but not that kind of drop shadow. Nice dark drop shadow. Bump it down a little bit. Oops. Bump it down a touch. There we go. All right, and then finally at the bottom of this stack, I might want one single button to actually start the directions or the trip. So with the rectangle, we're going to draw one out. I'm going to keep the border, the corner radius consistent at 8. And in this case, we want this button to really be a nice call to action. So I'm going to set the color a nice blue, something like that. And then, make sure this is in a group. Begin trip. A little too small, so let's bump it up. There we go. All right, that's looking pretty good. It's getting there, right? And then one thing we might want, what I was going to say is, at the bottom of this, we might want to display maybe some, music information, your playlist, whatever it might be, but running out of time. So let's go ahead and very quickly start tackling some of the information on the actual map over here. Let me very quickly group some of this. We'll call this navigation. There we go. All right, so on the actual map, we may want a few things. Obviously, we're gonna want some sort of a pin. We might want a location dot that maybe pulses with a Lottie animation, and maybe some additional information, the path and that sort of thing. So let's start with the location dot. you know, we can keep it simple and we can create a circle, and maybe we will set the color of the circle to a nice blue. We'll add a bit of a border, bump it up in size a little bit, right? We could leave it at that and call it a day and go on with our lives, right? Or we can get a bit fancy and add a bit of animation to this. Now, there are a few ways to add animation, but we can add a Lottie file just to keep our lives a little bit simple. So in the plugins, I do have the Lottie Files plugin installed, or you can go to lottiefiles.com and browse from there. And I'll search for something like Pulse. And we've got all these fun little Lottie animations that we can potentially use. This one here could work, so I'm going to just drag this directly in. And so probably a little bit too large, but just to kind of see what it's looking like, it's already set to play automatically, and I'm going to make sure to loop it. And if I go ahead and play, it's not bad, but it is a little bit too large. So I'm going to drop this in size a touch. I'm going to move it behind my location icon. There we go. It's so simple, but it will work, right? All right, I'm going to group this, call this location. Beautiful. And then, what else do we need on our map? We might want a location pin. Now, the one I designed earlier, it's not the greatest looking pin in the world. I'm sure there are much nicer pins. So let's look. Actually, you know what? Are there any Lottie files? That could be interesting. Now, the one downside to using Lottie files is that you can't edit the colors or the animation directly in XD. They're all built into the files. So, you know, if you were to grab, let's say, this icon here, right? If you really liked this one, the problem is the colors are very difficult to see against the background. Now, if you go to lottiefiles.com/editor, you can actually edit the files, granted that they are vector files. Some of them are not, so they're a little bit difficult to edit, or impossible to edit, actually. The pulse isn't aligned. Yeah, it's not perfectly aligned. It's slightly off, but, you know, there we go. It's still slightly off, but that's fine. But I can go ahead and maybe just drag this one on. These are very large. Inside that group. There we go. I'll pop this right about here. Maybe this is where we're heading. And now I'm going to loop that. And now we have two Lottie animations. So we have our location, and we also have our, we have our current location, and we have our destination over here on the left-hand side. Now again, can't really edit these Lottie files unless you go to the link that Wade just posted, lottiefiles.com/editor. Then you can make some tweaks and then re-download that. But yeah. And then the final thing we're going to do before we wrap things up is we're going to make sure that this is scrollable. So what I want is I'm going to select the map, the location icon, and also this, well, both location icons. And then over within the properties inspector, we're going to create a scroll group. We can do horizontal, vertical, or one that goes in both directions, which is what we're going to want in this situation. And we can adjust the bounds if we need to. In this case, we want to make sure that they snap right to the edge of our artboard. And we're also going to want to make sure that it's behind our navigation. But the important thing to note is that anything inside of these bounds will be visible immediately, and anything outside will be visible when you start scrolling. So if I dive into this scroll group, you're noticing nothing extends outside of the bounds. So if I were to launch the preview and try to pan around, nothing really happens, right? So we'll want to make sure to select the map and then enlarge it. And enlarge it. And now, if I launch the preview again, I can start panning around just by clicking and dragging. And it also works on your mobile devices as well. So if you're previewing on an iPad, you can just use your finger to move this around, right? And what's nice is you can also add additional elements outside of this. So if you, very quickly, if I want to add maybe a user, maybe this is where my friends might be, right? Let me go to Finder very quickly. I have some of these cute little meta people that I grabbed from UI 8. Place one over here. And I'll place another one over here, and then maybe one over here. And maybe another one up here, right? So if I launch the preview again, we can now scroll around and we can see all of our lovely friends all over the map, which is great. And I didn't get to it in this video, but we can also create components. So if you click on something like this or some sort of location icon, you know, a nice little window would pop up with more details. You can close it, all sorts of fun stuff. And that all works in scroll groups as well. Alrighty, that is going to wrap it up for me for today. Big thank you to everyone who has tuned in. Stick around, Kyle T. Webster is coming up in just a few minutes. Have a great weekend, everyone. Stay safe, and I will see you all next week.